In this video, we will discuss how to transfer assets into your trust. Let's start with the basics. What types of assets need to be transferred to your trust? Some examples are real property, non-retirement financial accounts, and businesses and stock that you own. When do you transfer assets to your trust? You should do this after your trust has been signed and notarized. And what happens if you don't transfer assets to your trust? Well, if that happens, then your estate might end up in probate after you pass away. And an important reason to have a trust is to avoid probate. Now let's look at the 3 rules to transferring assets to your trust. First, each asset must be correctly titled in the name of the trust. Second, make sure you record those assets on the Schedule A of the trust. And third, keep a record of the transfer of your assets to your trust. Now let's look more closely at the first rule. Each asset must be correctly titled in the name of the trust. The certification of trust document, which is included in your estate plan and an example is on the right, provides you with the correct title for your trust and for the trustee names. And all of your trust assets must have that exact same title. So in the example on the right, the trustee names are Mark A. Smith and Sarah L. Smith, and the trust name is Smith Family Trust, dated September 6, 2021. It's important to note that that date is a part of the name of the trust, and it won't change even if you amend or restate your trust. So for the Smith family, their trust name will always be Smith Family Trust, dated September 6, 2021. Now for real property, a deed must be created, which transfers the ownership of the property to the trust, and a grant deed is shown on the right. The deed should be in the name of the trustees and of the trust, and it must be recorded in the county where the property is located. So for the example on the right, the Smith's deed would be in the following name: Mark A. Smith and Sarah L. Smith, trustees of the Smith Family Trust, dated September 6, 2021. For non-retirement financial accounts, let's look at how to follow the first rule. We are not talking about retirement accounts, which are like IRAs, 401ks, 457s, because those cannot be transferred to the trust. For your non-retirement financial accounts, provide the certification of trust to the financial institution so that they will have the exact title of your trust. And then the institution will prepare paperwork for you to sign to transfer your account to the trust. Normally, you don't need to have a new account number, and for checking accounts, you don't typically need new checks. The checks will still be in your name, but the bank records will show the trust as the account name. And for businesses you own, let's look at how to follow the first rule. You will want to transfer your business to the trust with an assignment of your interest in the business to the trust. This is a document that should be prepared by an attorney, and an example is shown on the right. Now let's move on to the second rule, which is to make sure you record those assets on the Schedule A of the trust, which is attached at the end of your trust. It's important to note that simply listing an asset on the Schedule A does not actually transfer that asset to the trust. The Schedule A is merely a list of what you have transferred to the trust. For instance, for real property, on the Schedule A, you should list the property's address and assessor parcel number, or APN, and you can find your APN on your property tax bill. Make sure that all of your trust assets are listed on the Schedule A. So each time you transfer an asset to the trust, in the first rule, you also need to add that asset on the Schedule A. Moving on to the third rule, keep a record of the transfer of assets to the trust. So you'll want to keep a copy of the transfer wherever you store your estate plan. For instance, keep the first page of a bank account that has been transferred, or the grant deed for real estate that's been transferred to the trust. It is important to follow these 3 rules for each asset you transfer to the trust. To briefly recap, each asset must be correctly titled in the name of the trust. Make sure you record those assets on the Schedule A of the trust, and keep a record of the transfer of the asset to the trust. Please note the content of this video is not legal advice. Contact an estate planning attorney for legal advice.